Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. I've always prided myself on being an optimist. Even when life threw curveballs, I trusted Vanessa and I could weather any storm. She was my anchor, my confidant, the mother of my children. After 12 years of marriage, I thought I knew every nuance of her expressions, every hidden meaning in her words. But, as they say, it's the ones closest to you who are the hardest to see clearly. The first sign came in the form of her work trips. Vanessa had always been ambitious. As an events manager, her job was demanding, with long hours and last-minute changes. I respected that, even when it meant late nights or occasional weekends away. But over the past year, the trips had become more frequent. She started traveling to new cities, often without much detail about the events she was overseeing. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, why would I? I had no reason to doubt her. Vanessa was a dedicated professional, a fantastic mother, and my partner in every sense of the word. If anything, I felt guilty for not helping more at home while she pursued her career. Then came the changes in her demeanor. She was more distracted, often lost in her phone. She laughed at her messages, brushing off my casual questions with a quick, just work stuff. She started wearing perfume more often, even on days she claimed to be working from home. And the way she dressed for these so-called conferences became more sophisticated, almost alluring. One evening, as she was packing for a weekend trip to Chicago, I noticed something odd. Vanessa had always been practical about her travel attire, favoring comfortable slacks and blouses. This time, though, she slipped a sleek black dress and matching stilettos into her suitcase. "Big client meeting?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Her hand paused over the suitcase for the briefest moment. "Yeah, something like that," she replied, without looking at me. It was a small hesitation, barely noticeable. But for the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into my mind. Was she hiding something? Or was I just being paranoid? I pushed the thought aside. We'd been together for so long, built a life together. We had 2 kids, a dog, a home filled with laughter and shared memories. There was no room for mistrust in a marriage like ours. Or so I told myself. The real shift happened a few weeks later. We were having dinner, a rare family meal during the busy week. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the counter. Usually, she ignored it during meals, but this time, she jumped up, muttering something about an important work call. As she walked out of the kitchen, her phone lit up, and for a split second, I caught a glimpse of the notification. "Can't wait to see you this weekend, babe, Chris." The words were a punch to the gut. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Who was Chris? A colleague? A friend? Or something more? I didn't say anything that night. I didn't even confront her. Instead, I lay awake in bed, listening to her even breathing, wondering how I could find out the truth without causing a scene. The next day, while she was at work, I made my move. Vanessa had always been meticulous about her privacy, but she wasn't perfect. I knew she used the same password for most accounts, a combination of our wedding date and our kids' birthdays. Her email was my first stop. Most of it was benign, work correspondence, bills, the usual. But buried in her archived folder, I found a string of messages that confirmed my worst fears. Chris wasn't a colleague or a client. He was her lover. The emails were subtle at first, discussions about meeting for coffee, compliments about her outfit at some conference. But as I read on, the tone changed. They spoke in innuendos, hinted at stolen weekends, and shared inside jokes I didn't understand. One message stood out: "Last weekend was incredible. Can't wait to be in your arms again. Love, Chris." I felt a fire rise in my chest. Betrayal doesn't hit you all at once, it comes in waves, each revelation more painful than the last. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the kids playing in the backyard, their laughter a reminder of what was at stake. Or maybe it was the realization that I needed proof, irrefutable evidence she couldn't deny. That evening, I acted as though nothing had changed. Vanessa returned home late, claiming her meeting had run over. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for putting the kids to bed, and went upstairs to shower. I watched her go, wondering how she could act so normal, so innocent, while living a double life. The following week, I installed a tracking app on her phone. It was easy, she always left it charging in the kitchen while she got ready for work. The app would allow me to see her location in real time and access her texts and call logs. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I needed the truth. The first few days yielded nothing unusual. She went to work, attended meetings, and came home. I began to doubt myself, to question whether I was reading too much into those emails. But on Friday, everything changed. Vanessa had told me she'd be working late. Big project deadline, she said, avoiding my eyes. That evening, her location showed she was at a boutique hotel downtown. The name matched one of the places Chris had mentioned in his emails. I sat in the living room, staring at the map on my phone, my heart pounding. This was it. The proof I needed. But as much as I wanted to storm into that hotel and catch her in the act, I knew I had to play the long game. This wasn't just about confronting her, it was about taking control of the narrative. For the rest of the night, I planned my next move. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but it had to be on my terms. Vanessa had built her house of lies, and I was going to bring it crashing down. The next morning felt surreal. Vanessa returned home around noon, looking refreshed, with a glow that made my stomach turn. She greeted the kids warmly and planted a kiss on my cheek as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile, my mind churning with what I knew. The facade she wore was almost impressive. Almost. Late night at the office? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Yeah, she replied, stretching and heading toward the kitchen. We had to finalize some client presentations. You know how it is. I nodded, biting back the urge to confront her. The lies were coming so easily now, flowing off her tongue without hesitation. If I hadn't seen the evidence myself, I might have believed her. But now, every word out of her mouth felt like a calculated deception. Over the weekend, I acted as though everything was fine. I took the kids to the park, helped Vanessa with errands, and even grilled steaks for dinner Sunday night. All the while, I was plotting. I didn't want a messy confrontation or a dramatic showdown. I wanted control, clarity, and most importantly, justice. On Monday morning, Vanessa left for work as usual. I waited until she was out the door before calling her office. Her assistant picked up after a couple of rings. "Hi, this is Greg," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. Vanessa left her planner at home. I wanted to make sure she didn't have any client meetings this morning before I drop it off. There was a pause. Vanessa isn't in today," the assistant said. "She took a personal day." I clenched the phone tightly, my suspicions confirmed. "Oh, right. Of course. Thanks for letting me know." I hung up and checked the tracking app on her phone. She wasn't at home or anywhere near her office. Instead, her location showed she was at a cafe downtown. I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, a mix of businesspeople and students. I scanned the crowd, and there she was, sitting in a corner booth with him, Chris. He was exactly as I'd imagined from the emails, sharp suit, smug grin, and an air of arrogance that radiated even from a distance. They leaned toward each other, laughing, her hand casually brushing his arm. I stood frozen for a moment, watching them through the glass window. The scene felt like a punch to the gut. This was my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, sharing an intimate moment with another man. I thought about walking in, confronting them right there. But I knew it wasn't the time. I needed more than just an impulsive confrontation. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few photos. Vanessa's hand on his, the way she smiled at him, the way he looked at her like she was his. Evidence. Hard proof. I walked away, my stomach churning with anger and betrayal. That evening, Vanessa was unusually affectionate. She made my favorite dinner, joked with the kids, and even suggested we watch a movie together after they went to bed. It was as if she were trying to assuage some inner guilt. I played along, nodding and smiling, while every part of me screamed to call her out. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I continued gathering evidence, tracking her movements, taking screenshots of her messages, and documenting everything. I even found hotel receipts she'd hidden in a drawer in her office at home, complete with room numbers and dates that matched her work trips. Each discovery was like adding fuel to the fire of my resolve. I decided to take it one step further. Late one night, while Vanessa was asleep, I went through her laptop. It was risky, she rarely left it unattended, but I couldn't resist the chance to uncover more. Sure enough, I found folders of photos from her trips, including several of her and Chris together. They weren't inappropriate, but the intimacy was undeniable. Pictures of them dining, walking through parks, and laughing over drinks. She'd even saved a few with captions like, "The best weekend ever." It made my blood boil. But the most damning piece of evidence came from her email. Buried in her drafts folder was an unsent message to Chris. It read, "Chris, I'm so torn. These weekends with you make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. But I can't ignore the guilt. Greg is a good man, a great father, and he doesn't deserve this. I'm scared of what will happen if he finds out. I know we talked about telling him eventually, but I don't think I'm ready. Not yet." I sat back, staring at the screen. The words confirmed everything I feared. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning to confess at some point, to blow up our life when it suited her. My life. My children's lives. That was the moment I decided I couldn't wait for her to make her move. If she wanted to play games, I'd make sure I was the one setting the rules. The following weekend, I told Vanessa I had a business trip of my own, a conference in Miami. She barely looked up from her phone, murmuring, "Okay. Have fun." I packed a bag, kissed the kids goodbye, and left for the airport. In reality, I checked into a hotel a few miles away, waiting for her to take the bait. Sure enough, the tracker showed her heading downtown an hour later. She spent the night at another boutique hotel, her location static until the next morning. I didn't need to guess who she was with. I stayed up late, reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered. Photos, emails, messages, it was all there. Enough to confront her, to demand answers, to end this charade. But I wasn't just going to confront her. I wanted to dismantle the life she'd so carefully constructed, piece by piece. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. Vanessa had built her house of lies, and I was going to burn it to the ground. The morning of my return from Miami, I arrived home just as Vanessa was getting out of bed. She yawned and stretched, looking every bit the picture of a content wife who'd had a peaceful weekend with her kids. The irony was almost laughable. "How was your trip?" she asked, her tone casual as she poured coffee into her favorite mug. "Busy," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Lots of networking, but productive." She nodded and smiled, seemingly satisfied. The lie rolled off her like water on a duck's back. If she felt any guilt about spending the weekend in another man's arms, she didn't show it. I had to remind myself to stay calm. I had a plan, and it wasn't time to execute it just yet. The kids came bounding downstairs, excited to share their weekend stories. Their chatter filled the kitchen as we sat down for breakfast, and for a moment, it felt like any other Monday morning. Except I knew this would be the last time I'd sit at this table pretending everything was fine. Later that day, while Vanessa was at work, I made my move. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected, photos, emails, text messages, and even screenshots of her location history from the tracking app. I printed everything out, arranging it neatly into a binder. I wasn't just confronting her, I was preparing to take control of the situation. The final piece of the puzzle was Chris's wife. Through some sleuthing, I found her name, Rachel, and her contact information. I hesitated before dialing her number. This wasn't just about exposing Vanessa, it was about letting Rachel know the truth about her own marriage. After all, she deserved to know. When Rachel answered, her voice was polite but wary. "Hello." "Hi, Rachel. My name is Greg. I believe your husband, Chris, is having an affair with my wife." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her breath catch. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling. "What did you just say?" I took a deep breath and explained everything. I told her about the emails, the photos, the weekend getaways. I even offered to send her the evidence if she wanted. By the time I finished, her tone had shifted from disbelief to quiet fury. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I had no idea. But I believe you." We agreed to stay in touch, and I hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction. The first match had been lit. That evening, I waited for Vanessa to come home. She walked through the door, smiling as she kissed me on the cheek. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light. "It was productive," I replied, gesturing for her to join me in the living room. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "What about?" I pointed to the coffee table, where the binder sat in plain view. "About this." Her eyes flicked to the binder, and I saw the color drain from her face. She hesitated, then sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything," I said. "All the lies, the deceit, the weekends with Chris." "I know, Vanessa. I've known for weeks." She stared at the binder, her expression a mix of shock and fear. "Greg, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't insult me by trying to justify this. I don't want to hear your excuses." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "How long have you been lying to me? To our kids?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Then why did it?" I shot back. "Why, Vanessa? Was I not enough for you? Was our life not enough?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I don't know. I was unhappy. I felt unappreciated, invisible. And Chris, he made me feel alive." "Alive?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think this is about feeling alive? What about our kids? What about me?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, you did," I said, my tone cold. "You've destroyed everything we built. And now you're going to face the consequences." I stood up, pacing the room. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing for divorce. You'll leave this house, and I'm keeping custody of the kids. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Greg, please. We can fix this. I love you. I don't want to lose you." "You lost me the moment you decided he was worth more than our marriage," I said firmly. "This isn't fixable, Vanessa. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She begged, pleaded, and even tried to shift the blame, but I didn't waver. I'd made up my mind, and there was no going back. When I handed her the divorce papers 2 days later, she signed them through tears, realizing she had no leverage. The evidence was overwhelming, and she knew it. As I watched her pack her things and leave the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. The house of lies she built had crumbled, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But this wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about rebuilding my life, and the lives of our children, on a foundation of truth. The fire had burned away the deceit, leaving room for something better. Something real. The house felt quieter after Vanessa moved out. The kind of quiet that isn't comforting, but hollow. I adjusted to the new routine, waking up early to get the kids to school, taking over the responsibilities Vanessa once handled. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The kids needed stability now more than ever, and I was determined to give it to them. In the weeks following her departure, Vanessa reached out several times. Sometimes she was apologetic, sometimes pleading. Occasionally, she was angry, accusing me of overreacting, of ruining what could have been fixed. I ignored most of her messages. The divorce was moving forward, and I wasn't about to reopen old wounds. But then came the message I couldn't ignore. It arrived late one evening, just as I was preparing to go to bed. Her text was short but jarring: "We need to talk. It's about Chris. Please, Greg, call me." I almost deleted it on the spot, but something about her tone made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I dialed her number. She answered immediately. "Greg," she said, her voice shaky. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but you need to know what's going on." I didn't reply, letting the silence force her to continue. "It's Chris," she said finally. "He's not who I thought he was." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No kidding." "No, Greg, listen to me," she pressed. "I found out, he's been lying to me too. I didn't know he was married until you told me. He swore he'd leave his wife, but now he's ghosting me. And, there's more." I leaned against the counter, my patience wearing thin. "Vanessa, I don't care about your problems with him." "You should," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because he's dangerous." That caught my attention. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then said, "After you exposed the affair, Rachel contacted me. She wanted to talk face to face. I thought she'd be furious, but she was scared. She told me Chris has a history of manipulation, emotional, financial, even physical. He's done this before, Greg, to other women. And when they've tried to leave, bad things happened." A cold chill ran down my spine. "You expect me to believe this now? After everything you've done?" "I didn't believe it either," she admitted. "Until he started threatening me." "Threatening you?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "After I told him it was over, he showed up at my apartment. He was calm at first, but when I tried to make him leave, he lost it. He grabbed me, Greg. Told me he wasn't finished with me." My grip tightened on the phone. Vanessa had lied to me so many times that trusting her felt impossible. But there was something raw in her voice, something I couldn't dismiss. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "I tried," she said. "But he's good at covering his tracks. He knows how to make it look like I'm the crazy one." "What do you want me to do about it, Vanessa?" I snapped. "I'm not your knight in shining armor." She was silent for a moment, then said, "I don't know. I just thought you should know. In case he comes after you too." The thought hadn't crossed my mind until that moment. What if Chris blamed me for blowing up his life? What if his anger extended beyond Vanessa? I hung up without another word, her warnings echoing in my mind. I told myself she was exaggerating, trying to manipulate me into sympathy. But a gnawing doubt lingered. The following week, I noticed a car parked near the house. It wasn't one I recognized, and it didn't belong to any of my neighbors. At first, I dismissed it as a coincidence. But when the same car appeared the next day, parked a little farther down the street, I started to feel uneasy. That night, I heard footsteps outside my window. I jumped out of bed, grabbing a baseball bat from the closet, and crept downstairs. The kids were asleep, oblivious to the danger I now felt closing in around us. When I reached the front door, I peered through the peephole but saw nothing. The street was empty, the eerie silence stretching into the night. But as I turned to go back upstairs, something caught my eye, a shadow shifting near the side of the house. My heart pounded as I yanked open the door and stepped outside, bat in hand. "Who's there?" I shouted into the darkness. There was no reply, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the windows, my paranoia growing with every creak and groan of the house. By morning, I was exhausted but resolved. I wasn't going to wait for something to happen. I filed a police report that day, detailing Vanessa's warnings and the strange occurrences around the house. The officer took my statement seriously, promising to increase patrols in the area. But as I left the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, I heard the sound of shattering glass from downstairs. My blood ran cold. I locked their door, whispering for them to stay quiet, then grabbed the bat and crept down the stairs. In the living room, the front window was smashed, shards of glass glittering on the floor. A figure stood in the shadows, their face obscured. "Get out of my house!" I roared, raising the bat. The figure stepped forward, and the faint light from the street lamps illuminated his face. It was Chris. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can just destroy my life and walk away?" I tightened my grip on the bat. "Leave, or I'll call the cops." He laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "Go ahead. By the time they get here, you'll regret ever crossing me." Before he could move, I swung the bat with all my strength. It connected with his shoulder, sending him staggering backward. He cursed, clutching his arm, but didn't leave. "You don't scare me," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. For a moment, he hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the night. I locked the door, shaking as I called the police. When they arrived, Chris was long gone, but they promised to track him down. As I sat on the couch, waiting for the adrenaline to fade, I realized something. Vanessa's betrayal had been devastating, but Chris's darkness had pulled me into a far more dangerous game. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about survival, for me, for my kids, and even for Vanessa. The house of lies had burned to the ground, but from the ashes, a new battle had emerged. One I wasn't prepared for, but one I was determined to win.